I'll never forget the way she looked at me that Friday afternoon, like I was a relic that needed to be cleared out, an outdated piece of equipment taking up valuable space. "Martin, we're going in a new direction," she said with that practiced corporate smile that never quite reached her eyes. "We need fresh perspectives, innovative thinkers, younger energy." After 22 years of dedicated service to quantum solutions, I was being pushed out for the crime of having gray hair and reading glasses. What the brilliant new CEO didn't realize was that I wasn't just any aging engineer. I was the backbone of everything they planned to build their future on. I joined Quantum Solutions back when it was just 8 people working out of a converted garage in Palo Alto. Those early days were magical. Endless coffee, midnight coding sessions, and the pure exhilaration of creating something from nothing. Our founder, Richard Teller, was a visionary who recognized talent regardless of packaging. He had this uncanny ability to see potential where others saw only problems. When I suggested we pivot from consumer software to specialized industrial applications in our second year, he listened intently while the other executives dismissed the idea as too niche. 3 weeks later, after I presented a detailed market analysis and prototype, he greenlit the project that would eventually become our flagship product line. When I developed our first proprietary algorithm for manufacturing process optimization, he celebrated my innovation and made sure my name was on the patent. "You're not just building products, Martin," he told me once after a particularly grueling development sprint. "You're building the future of this company." Those words stayed with me through countless challenges and setbacks over the years. For over 2 decades, I poured everything into that company. I missed my daughter Ellie's soccer games to fix critical bugs before major releases. I delayed vacations when clients needed emergency support. The weekend of my 20th wedding anniversary was spent troubleshooting a catastrophic system failure at our largest client's manufacturing plant. My wife Susan understood. She always did, but I still see the quiet disappointment in the photographs from the belated celebration we held 2 weeks later. I mentored countless young engineers, many of whom now hold leadership positions across the industry. People like Tomas Chen, now CTO at Rivertech, or Samira Patel, who founded her own successful startup after cutting her teeth on my team. My engineering division consistently outperformed every other department in innovation metrics and revenue generation. The industrial automation suite I architected became the gold standard in manufacturing facilities across 3 continents, saving our clients billions in operational costs while dramatically reducing their environmental impact. Last year alone, my team's work generated nearly 40% of the company's $220 million revenue. The board sent me a handwritten note of appreciation along with a modest bonus that December. The backbone of quantum, they called me. How quickly backbones become expendable. Everything changed when Richard decided to retire. His announcement stunned us all. He had always seemed too passionate, too involved to ever step away. But a minor heart attack followed by a cancer scare had shifted his priorities. His desire to spend time with his grandchildren and travel with his wife while his health permitted led him to make the difficult decision. The board conducted what they called an extensive search for his replacement. But we all knew they had their eye on Vanessa Cole from the beginning. She had the perfect resume: Harvard MBA, successful stints at 2 tech giants, and the kind of polished presence that impressed investors. At 37, she represented the future of leadership the board was so eager to showcase. I remember our first interaction at the company-wide introduction meeting. She spoke confidently about revolutionary changes and breaking with outdated methodologies. Her eyes swept past me and the other senior engineers as if we were invisible. After the meeting, I approached her to introduce myself and share some insights about ongoing projects. "I'll have my assistant schedule something," she said dismissively, already turning toward a cluster of younger employees. Vanessa arrived with the subtlety of a hurricane. Within her first week, she'd rearranged the entire executive floor, replaced our comfortable collaboration spaces with sterile, Instagram-worthy setups, and issued a company-wide mandate about reinventing our image. The casual Friday policy that had been a company tradition since its founding disappeared. The flexible work arrangements that had helped us retain top talent were under review. She hired a team of consultants who spent their days creating PowerPoint presentations about disruption and youth-driven innovation. In meetings, she would constantly talk about digital natives and how companies needed to be led by people who grew up with technology. I tried to adapt. I updated my presentation style, learned the new corporate buzzwords, and even downloaded all the apps the younger team members used for collaboration. I stayed late to familiarize myself with emerging technologies that might benefit our products, even though many were solutions in search of problems our clients didn't have. I volunteered for cross-functional teams and offered my experience to help bridge gaps between established systems and new initiatives. But I could feel myself being systematically sidelined. My input in strategic meetings was increasingly ignored. My project proposals were perpetually under review. My team was slowly reassigned to other managers, many of whom had been at the company less than 5 years. When I raised concerns about maintaining compatibility with our legacy systems that thousands of clients depended on, I was labeled resistant to change in my performance review. The final straw came when Vanessa announced a new innovation incubator headed by a 29-year-old former social media manager with no engineering background. They were given a budget that dwarfed my department's and carte blanche to reimagine our technological approach. When I requested to join the initiative, offering my technical expertise to help guide their explorations, I received a terse email. "We're looking for uninhibited thinking, not constrained by traditional approaches." Then came that Friday afternoon meeting. Vanessa's executive assistant had scheduled it for 4:30 p.m., late enough that most employees would be gone by the time I left her office. She kept me waiting for 20 minutes outside her glass-walled office while she finished a call, her animated gestures visible to anyone walking by. A deliberate power play that I'd seen her use before. "We're restructuring the engineering department," Vanessa explained once I was seated, sliding a folder across her immaculate desk. "We're offering you a generous severance package." The words were delivered with clinical detachment, as if she were discussing the replacement of office furniture rather than ending a 22-year career. "On what grounds?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's not about grounds, Martin. It's about strategic direction. We need to allocate resources toward future growth areas." When I asked why I was being let go, despite consistently exceptional performance reviews, she hesitated before saying, "The company needs to project a certain image now that we're preparing for our IPO. We need to showcase innovation and youth." The last word was spoken softly, almost apologetically, but the message was unmistakable. I sat there, letting her words sink in. 2 decades of loyalty reduced to a liability because of my birth year. I considered arguing, pointing out the illegal nature of age discrimination, but something held me back. Instead, I simply asked, "Have you reviewed our IP portfolio recently?" She looked confused. "Our legal team has everything well documented." I nodded slowly. "I'm sure they do. I just wonder if anyone has explained the licensing terms of the core technology patents." "I'm not sure what you're getting at," she replied, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "It's probably nothing important," I said, maintaining a calm demeanor that surprised even me. "Just something Richard and I arranged years ago. I'm sure your team will figure it out." I signed the papers that day. The severance was indeed generous: 6 months' salary, extended health benefits, and accelerated vesting of my stock options. I cleared out my desk under the watchful eye of security, a humiliating escort for someone who had helped build the place. Younger employees, many of whom I had hired and trained, averted their eyes as I walked past with my cardboard box of personal effects. Only Erin from accounting, who had been with the company almost as long as I had the courage to approach me with tears in her eyes and whisper, "This place is losing its soul." That evening, I sat in my home office surrounded by awards, patents, and photographs documenting my professional journey. There was the team photo from our first major product launch, Richard and I grinning like children as we popped champagne. The innovation award from the industry association that had once seemed so important. The framed patent certificates that my wife had insisted on displaying prominently. Susan brought me a whiskey and sat beside me in silence for a while before asking, "Are you going to fight this?" I took a sip, feeling the burn at the back of my throat. Not in the way they're expecting. What Vanessa didn't understand, what the board had apparently failed to explain to her, was the unique arrangement Richard and I had established years ago. When I developed our core technological innovations, Richard insisted I retain partial ownership of the patents. "Always protect yourself," he told me. "Companies change, leadership changes, but innovation is forever." It was an unusual arrangement in our industry, where most companies demand complete ownership of anything developed on their time or using their resources. But Richard had been generous and far-sighted. Of the 24 patents that formed the foundation of Quantum's most profitable products, I personally held joint ownership of 11. The licensing agreement allowed the company to use them royalty-free only under specific conditions, one being my continued employment or mutual termination agreement. My termination had been anything but mutual. I spent the next week reconnecting with industry colleagues and fielding a surprising number of job offers. Word of my departure had spread quickly, and competitors were eager to benefit from Vanessa's short-sightedness. I spoke with Richard, who was appalled by my treatment but not entirely surprised. "The board has been pushing for a youth movement for years," he admitted. "I fought it as long as I could." 3 weeks after my departure, as I was considering job offers from 2 of Quantum's competitors, I received a panicked call from the company's chief legal counsel, Marcus Williams. We had worked together for nearly 15 years, and his normally unflappable demeanor was noticeably absent. "Martin," he began, his voice tense. "There seems to be some confusion regarding the patent licensing arrangements. I was hoping we could meet to discuss the matter." I could hear the strain in his voice. "Our IPO filing has hit a significant obstacle." I allowed myself a small smile at the understatement. It turned out that Vanessa's rush to clean house had extended to several other senior engineers and developers, 3 of whom also held partial patent rights under similar arrangements Richard had made. Between us, we controlled access to nearly 70% of the company's core intellectual property. Without revised licensing agreements, their IPO valuation would collapse. The products they were banking their future on couldn't legally be sold without our consent. Marcus was diplomatic but desperate. "There appears to have been some oversight in the transition process," he said, avoiding any direct criticism of the new CEO. "We'd like to rectify this situation as quickly and amicably as possible." I agreed to a meeting the following day at a neutral location, a private room at my club downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early to find Vanessa already waiting, her posture rigid and her expression carefully neutral. Marcus sat beside her, along with a patent attorney I didn't recognize. I had brought my own lawyer, a specialist in intellectual property rights, who had helped draft the original agreements years ago. The renegotiation meetings were fascinating. Vanessa avoided eye contact as her legal team proposed various arrangements: one-time buyouts, graduated licensing fees, even offering to rehire me in a special advisory capacity with limited responsibilities and visibility. I remained pleasant but firm throughout the process. My terms were simple: a consulting contract at twice my previous salary, with remote work options, restoration of positions for my unfairly terminated colleagues, and a formal company policy against age discrimination with mandatory diversity training for all executives. I also requested a seat on the product strategy committee. Not a board seat, just a guaranteed voice in the room where decisions about our technology were made. "That's extortion," Vanessa finally snapped during our second meeting. My lawyer cleared his throat. "Actually, Miss Cole, it's a negotiation between intellectual property holders and a company that wishes to use that property. Standard business practice." "These patents were developed while Martin was an employee," she countered. "They belong to the company." "I suggest you review the original agreements again," my lawyer replied calmly, sliding copies across the table. These arrangements were established with full board approval and legal oversight. They're quite binding. The negotiations stretched over 3 weeks. I learned that Vanessa had attempted to downplay the situation to the board initially, suggesting it was a minor legal technicality that could be easily resolved. When that proved impossible, she had tried to place the blame on Richard's unconventional management practices and Marcus's legal team for not flagging the issue earlier. But as one board member bluntly told her in a meeting I later heard about, "You fired key patent holders without due diligence. This is Business 101. Eventually, we reached an agreement that satisfied all parties, though some more grudgingly than others. My consulting role would focus on technology strategy and innovation pipeline management, with explicit protection against future termination without cause. My former colleagues received similar arrangements, proportional to their contributions and patent holdings. The company would establish a comprehensive age diversity initiative and revisit all terminations from the past 6 months to identify any other potential cases of discrimination. 6 months later, Quantum Solutions had its IPO. It was successful, though not the blockbuster Vanessa had promised the board. The mandatory disclosures about intellectual property licensing arrangements had raised some investor concerns, but the company's strong product line and market position ultimately carried the day. The stock rose 22% on the first day of trading, respectable, but not the 40% plus jump Vanessa had been boasting about in internal communications. I now work 3 days a week, primarily from home, except for monthly in-person meetings. I mentor young engineers, including Vanessa's new innovation team, who turned out to be bright but desperately in need of guidance on enterprise-level engineering challenges. I spend my remaining time teaching engineering at the local community college and finally taking those fishing trips I had postponed for years. My patent royalties continue to grow as the company expands into new markets, and I've established a scholarship fund for older adults seeking to refresh their technical skills. The company culture has gradually begun to heal. The performative youth emphasis has been replaced by a more genuine focus on diversity of thought and experience. Some of the sterile redesign has been quietly reversed in favor of more functional work environments. The flexible work arrangements have returned, now touted as a competitive advantage in talent recruitment. Vanessa remains as CEO, though rumor has it the board has significantly curtailed her authority. A new COO with extensive industry experience, a woman in her 50s, now oversees most operational decisions. We maintain a professionally cordial relationship during the quarterly review meetings I now lead. Sometimes, when I'm presenting the latest innovations from my team, I catch her watching me with a peculiar expression. Something between respect and regret. The most satisfying moment came 3 months after my return, when a critical client integration project was on the verge of collapse. The young team assigned to it had built an elegant but impractical solution that failed to account for the client's legacy systems. I was called in as an emergency consultant and spent a weekend rebuilding core components of the integration layer. When it was successfully deployed, saving a $12 million contract, Vanessa sent me a brief but significant email. "Your experience made the difference here. Thank you." I don't derive any particular pleasure from her discomfort or the whispered acknowledgments that my firing had been a mistake. I've been in this industry long enough to know that humility comes to everyone eventually. Experience, as it turns out, truly is irreplaceable. A lesson that cost Quantum millions to learn, but ultimately made them stronger. Last week, I interviewed a promising candidate for our engineering team, a former factory worker in his 50s who had retrained as a software developer. His previous employer had passed him over despite his excellent coding skills, citing cultural fit concerns. Their loss will be our gain. When I shared his resume with Vanessa, she simply nodded and said, "If you think he's good, that's enough for me." As for me, I finally have time for my daughter's graduate school ceremonies and those fishing trips I kept postponing. Susan and I celebrated our 25th anniversary with a month-long trip to New Zealand. No laptops, no emergency calls, just us reconnecting after years of putting my career first. My blood pressure is down, my sleep has improved, and I've rediscovered hobbies I'd abandoned decades ago. Some might call it karma. I just call it life's natural balance. And a reminder that in technology, as in life, innovation without wisdom is like a powerful engine without a steering wheel. Sooner or later, you crash. I still keep that first patent certificate framed on my wall. Next to it now hangs a simple handwritten note from one of my community college students, a woman in her 60s making a midlife career change. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to matter. In the end, that's the real victory, not the vindication or the financial security, but the knowledge that my experience continues to have value, that the wisdom accumulated over decades of problem solving still has the power to make a difference, not despite my age, but because of it.